All right, so get ready because today we're going to explore personal finance, but not the usual way.
Yeah, not the boring spreadsheets.
Right, exactly. Forget about interest rates and all that stuff. Today we're going deep into the psychology of money.
Yeah.
We'll be talking about Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money. It's a really insightful look at why we make the money decisions we do, even the ones that maybe don't make a whole lot of sense on the surface.
It's really about the stories we tell ourselves about money and how our own experiences, our background, really shapes how we think about risk, how we think about reward,
Hmm.
and even what we consider like enough.
That is such a good point, and it actually leads perfectly into one of Housel's biggest takeaways from the book, which is the power of personal history. He says our relationship with money is kind of like a fingerprint, molded by our unique experiences. Everyone's is different.
Yeah.
So like my upbringing and the way I've learned about money and, my financial experiences, they're totally different from yours.
Of course, yeah.
So naturally, we're going to have different approaches to money.
Absolutely. And Housel actually illustrates this with a really cool anecdote about John F. Kennedy. So picture this. It's the 1960 election,
Okay.
and JFK's opponent, he uses Kennedy's, privileged upbringing and his lack of experience with the Great Depression as like a weapon against him. Voters were like, wait a minute, can this guy really understand our struggle, the everyday American, if he's never had to, pinch pennies?
Wow.
Interesting, right?
Yeah, just because someone's wealthy doesn't automatically mean they understand the struggles of someone who, isn't.
Exactly.
You know what it reminds me of? All those articles that compare, like, how different generations experience the stock market.
Oh, yeah.
Like, someone born in the 50s might have seen the market as kind of stagnant, but for someone born in the 70s, it was like, boom, going up, up, up. Their whole ideas of risk and reward is shaped by what they've actually lived through.
It's not about intelligence, it's about the narrative, right? The story that those experiences create. Like, if someone grows up seeing their parents, struggle with inflation in the 60s,
Hmm.
they might be way more hesitant to just like spend freely as adults.
So what you're saying is like, if I see someone making a financial decision that I think is maybe a little crazy,
Yeah, yeah,
like say they spend their emergency fund on lottery tickets,
right.
instead of judging them, maybe I should try to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, I think that's a great point
Okay.
because their decision might make perfect sense in the context of their own life story.
Yeah, everyone's got their own story.
Exactly. And I think that empathy is key to even having like productive conversations about money. Wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of shifting our perspective, Husserl's next point really kind of blew my mind. He says that luck and risk are like two sides of the same coin. They're always there influencing our financial journeys, right? I mean, we love to attribute success to skill,
Oh, for sure.
like, oh, they made it because they're so smart, they work so hard.
Yeah, yeah.
But Husserl says, hold on, luck and risk play a huge role, maybe more than we want to admit.
It's easy to fall into that trap, though.
It is.
Of thinking like success is this formula you just got to figure out, right? But then Hassel throws this curveball at us with the story of Bill Gates and his childhood friend Kent Evans.
Oh, yeah.
Both brilliant kids, super driven, and they both had access to this rare computer terminal, like a major privilege back then.
Hmm.
But then life happens. Kent dies in a mountain climbing accident, and Gates becomes, well, Bill Gates.
It makes you think about all those what ifs, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Like, how many other brilliant people are out there who just haven't had that lucky break yet? Or maybe they dodged a bullet that would have changed everything.
It's impossible to know, right?
Yeah?
And we see the same dynamic when we judge, like, historical figures.
Well, what did you say?
We praise, say, Vanderbilt for breaking the rules, building his railroad empire.
Right.
But then we condemn Enron for pushing the boundaries of accounting. But were their actions really that different? I don't know.
It's a good question.
Luck definitely played a part in their outcomes, though.
That is so true. It's like that fine line between, like, being a visionary and being reckless.
Right.
And a lot of it comes down to luck. So how are we supposed to judge success and failure then? I mean, do we just throw up our hands and say, it's all random?
Not exactly. It's about acknowledging that both luck and risk are always there, Sometimes they're working for you, sometimes they're not. Instead of focusing on those outlier success stories, those one in a million cases, maybe look for the broader patterns.
Okay, so like look for the trends.
Yeah, and ask yourself, what can I actually learn from this? What lessons can I take away?
Okay, so maybe instead of trying to talkie those, crazy success stories, focus on building a good foundation and understanding that luck is going to play a role no matter what.
Right.
This makes me think about something else Housel talks about, which is the power of just staying in the game, Time. He says time and the magic of compounding. Those are the secret weapons of wealth creation.
He drops this stat that just blew my mind.
Okay, hit me.
99.9% of Warren Buffett's wealth, it came after he turned 50.
What? The Oracle of Omaha made almost all of his money after 50.
I know, right? The second half of his life, it's incredible.
So even if you feel like you're behind in building wealth, you've still got time.
Lots of time.
It's not about getting rich quick. It's about staying in the game for the long haul.
Exactly. And Housel even compares Buffett to Jim Simons, who's a hedge fund manager with incredible average returns, like even higher than Buffett's.
Really?
Yeah. But you want to know something?
Yeah, tell me.
Simons has less overall wealth because he's been investing for a shorter amount of time.
Wow. So slow and steady wins the race, huh?
It really does. You know, Housel uses this great analogy about hard drive storage. For decades, growth was slow, but then in the 90s, boom, things exploded. We went from gigabytes to terabytes. That's compounding in action. It might not be flashy or exciting, but it's so powerful over time.
Okay, I'm getting it. Patience is key.
It is.
I love how Housel explains these kind of complex ideas in such a relatable way.
He's a great storyteller.
He is. This whole idea of compounding, it makes me think about how I view money's purpose in general.
And that actually leads into another really powerful point that Housel makes. He believes the ultimate dividend of wealth is freedom.
Freedom, huh?
Yeah, the freedom to do what matters most to you.
Okay.
He argues that the real value of money isn't about, the number in your bank account. It's about the control it gives you over your time.
I think I get that. Like, I remember when I was doing this crazy investment banking internship, the salary was insane.
Oh, I bet.
And I thought, this is it. I'm going to be so happy. But the reality was I had zero control over my time.
Yeah.
It was like a gilded cage. I realized then that freedom is way more valuable than a big paycheck.
It's a trade-off a lot of people make, right?
It is.
And Housel points out this interesting fact. Even though America's the richest nation ever, people aren't any happier now than they were back in the 1950s.
Really?
Yeah, because all that wealth hasn't really translated into more free time.
We're all just on a different hamster wheel, huh?
Kind of, yeah. Instead of clocking in at a factory, we're glued to our phones.
Always on call.
Exactly. So the goal should be to build wealth that buys us options, not just more stuff, right?
Okay, so it's not about buying a fancy car. It's about having the option to walk away from a job that makes you miserable.
Now you're getting it.
I'm starting to see money in a whole new light here.
That's great to hear. And, speaking of shifting perspectives, Housel has this really interesting take on saving.
Okay, I'm
He
listening.
compares it to, get this, energy efficiency for your finances.
Energy efficiency. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So think about those oil crises back in the day.
Yeah, I vaguely remember those from history class.
Right. We realized we couldn't just keep using more and more oil forever, so we started making more fuel-efficient cars, appliances, homes.
Right.
We essentially grew our energy wealth by needing less energy.
Okay, so you're saying instead of just trying to earn more money, I can also grow my wealth by figuring out how to need less.
Exactly. It's a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, it is.
And the beauty of saving is it's totally within our control, right? Unlike investments, which can go up and down,
Right?
saving is a guaranteed way to increase your financial security.
I like how you said that. It's like finding free money. Sometimes I forget how much control I actually have over my finances.
It's easy to feel powerless when you're focused on things you can't control.
That's true. But let's be real for a second. Sometimes emotions get in the way of making the most rational financial decisions.
Oh, absolutely. Which brings us to another great point that Housel makes. The importance of being reasonable over rational.
Okay, I like that.
He reminds us that, hey, we're not spreadsheets. We're humans. We've got emotions. We've got personal stuff going on.
We're messy.
Exactly. I love the story he tells about Julius Wagner-Jaureg.
Who's that?
He was this doctor who treated syphilis by, get this, inducing fevers in his patients.
Wait, what? Fevers?
Yeah. At the time, fevers were terrifying, right? People thought they were deadly, but Wagner-Jaureg saw that they could actually be beneficial. His methods were super controversial, but they worked.
So sometimes the right answer isn't the obvious one.
Exactly. It's about challenging our assumptions about what we think is rational.
Okay, so how does this apply to personal finance?
Well, sometimes the most mathematically sound investment strategy might be totally emotionally draining,
Yeah, I could see that.
Like, what good is a 20% return if you're stressed out all the time and can't sleep?
Right. So it's okay to prioritize peace of mind over maximizing returns.
Absolutely. Sometimes the most reasonable decision is the one that lets you live your life without constantly obsessing over your portfolio.
Yeah, it's all about finding that balance, right?
It is, between optimizing for returns and making sure you're actually comfortable with your financial decisions.
Okay, I'm really starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
It's all connected.
We've talked about personal history, luck, time, freedom, even the importance of being reasonable instead of just rational. Now, where does this idea of narratives fit in? You mentioned that earlier.
That's a great question because whether we realize it or not, the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we hear, they have a huge impact on how we make decisions about money.
Ooh, that sounds like a whole other can of worms. I can't wait to hear more.
Well, you're in luck because we'll unpack all of that in part 2 of our deep dive.
Perfect. I'm ready. Okay, so we're back for part 2 of our deep dive into the psychology of money. And last time we were talking about, how powerful these narratives, these stories we tell ourselves can be when we're talking about, money and finances. So I'm ready to dig into that a little bit deeper.
Yeah, it's wild how much those stories influence us. Sometimes I think even more than like the cold, hard facts.
It's true. It's true.
So Housel, he uses this really interesting thought experiment to kind of illustrate this point. He says, imagine an alien visiting Earth in 2009, right after the whole, financial crisis.
Okay.
And this alien, they see all of Earth's resources. They're like technology, infrastructure, all the human capital we have. It's all pretty much intact, right? But everyone's freaking out. Everyone feels way poorer.
I could see how that would be confusing for an alien. It's like, wait a minute, the planet's still here, the people are still here, what's the big deal?
Exactly. But see, that's the power of narrative. That story we were telling ourselves about the housing market, it's always going up, up, up. And the financial institutions, they're rock solid, nothing can touch them. That story just totally fell apart.
Hmm.
And even though, like, tangible things, they hadn't really changed that much, the perceived loss, it was huge.
Oh, yeah.
People felt like the rug had been pulled out from under them.
That's a really good example. It shows how our perception of a situation can sometimes be more powerful than the actual situation itself.
Absolutely. Like, think about how many people were terrified to invest after 2008.
Oh, yeah.
Even though historically the market always recovers.
Always.
It just takes time. But that fear, that narrative of the market is going to crash again, it really held people back.
So it sounds like it's really important to be aware of those narratives, those stories that are influencing our decisions. But how do we actually do that? Do we just have to, become super skeptical of everything we hear?
I wouldn't say skeptical necessarily, but definitely more mindful.
Okay.
Ask yourself, what story is being told here? And who benefits from me believing it?
That's a good point.
Like, is it a news outlet trying to get my attention with some crazy headline? Is it a financial guru promising, some unrealistic return?
It's like if they could predict the market that well, they wouldn't be telling anyone else.
Right.
They'd be off on their private island somewhere.
Exactly.
This whole narrative thing, it makes me think about another point Housel makes in the book about the importance of leaving room for error.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, even when we think we've got it all figured out, life has a way of, throwing us a curveball.
Right. It's like we can make the best plans.
You can make all the spreadsheets you want.
Exactly. But there's always going to be something you couldn't have predicted.
Mm-hmm.
And Housel, he uses this really cool analogy to kind of illustrate this. He talks about blackjack card counters.
Okay.
Those people who can basically predict the flow of the game.
Like Rain Man style.
Right. But even the most skilled card counters, they don't bet all their chips on a single hand. They know that even with the odds in their favor, they could still be wrong.
Oh, I see. So it's not about trying to eliminate risk altogether. It's more about, managing it intelligently.
Exactly. It's like diversifying your investments.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. It's about building in that margin of safety, that cushion to absorb the losses.
So you don't get completely wiped out if things go south.
Right. And this principle, it applies to so much more than just gambling or investing.
This is making me think about, emergency funds. Is that another way of leaving room for error?
Absolutely. Having an emergency fund is like having that financial oxygen mask.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Right. It lets you keep breathing even when the turbulence hits. Housel actually shares this example of Bill Gates back in the early days of Microsoft. He insisted on having enough cash on hand to cover a whole year of payroll, even if they didn't bring in any revenue.
Wow, Bill Gates playing it safe. That's amazing. I never thought of it that way. I guess it makes sense. Having that cushion, it gives you the freedom to, navigate those early years without panicking every time there's a little bump in the road.
Exactly. It's about having that peace of mind.
It's about those emotional shock absorbers too, right?
That's a great way to put it.
We can look at a spreadsheet and say, oh yeah, I can handle a 20% drop in my portfolio.
Yeah, on paper.
But when it actually happens,
Right, it's a different story.
when you see your hard-earned money disappearing, it's scary.
Exactly. And that's where Housel's emphasis on being reasonable over rational comes in. We have to remember that we're not robots. Our emotions play a huge role in how we handle those ups and downs.
It's true. So building in that margin of safety, it's not just about protecting our money. It's about protecting our mental health, too.
I think that's a really important point.
It's interesting how we seem to be wired to react more strongly to the negative stuff.
Oh, totally. Housel talks about that too, how pessimism seems to grab our attention way more easily than good news.
It's like we're bombarded with negativity everywhere we turn. Economic doom and gloom, market crashes, political scandals. It can feel like pessimism is just like the default setting.
Right. And it makes sense from like an evolutionary perspective.
Oh yeah, like our caveman ancestors.
Exactly. The ones who were always on the lookout for danger, those were the ones who survived.
The ones who were like, hey, what's that noise?
Exactly. And they pass on their genes. But in today's world, that negativity bias, it can really distort how we see things.
Yeah, we're living in a time that's safer, healthier, and wealthier than ever before. But you wouldn't know it from watching the news.
It's true. It's like pessimism sells, but progress, it kind of just whispers.
And if we buy into that negativity all the time, it can affect our financial decisions too, right?
Absolutely. If we're constantly convinced that the world is ending, why would we invest for the long term?
Or believe that things can get better.
Exactly. Think about those peak oil predictions we talked about before.
Yeah.
Everyone was convinced we were running out, but then what happened? Innovation came along, we adapted.
We always find a way.
We do. Humans are incredibly resilient.
It's true. But sometimes I think we get so caught up in what other people are doing, comparing ourselves,
Oh, yeah.
that we forget to focus on our own goals.
And that leads to another really important point that Housel makes. The danger of comparing ourselves to others who are playing a totally different financial game.
Okay, I like that. Different financial games.
He uses the example of Yahoo during the dot-com bubble.
Oh yeah, Yahoo.
At its peak, the company's valuation was just insane. To long-term investors, it made no sense.
Like a zillion times revenue or something
It's like
ridiculous.
total bubble territory.
But for the short-term momentum traders, it made perfect sense. They were just focused on that upward trajectory.
They were just riding the wave.
Exactly. They didn't really care about the long-term value.
So it's like they were playing checkers while the long-term investors were playing chess. Same board, but a totally different game.
That's a great analogy. And that's why it's so crucial to define your own game.
Don't get caught up in someone else's game.
Exactly. Figure out what you want to achieve and build a plan that works for you.
Don't try to run a marathon when everyone else is sprinting.
Exactly. You'll just burn yourself out.
Okay, so we've got to define our own game, be aware of those narratives, leave room for error. What else should we be watching out for in this crazy world of finance? Well, one thing that Housel really cautions us against is falling for, the allure of financial guruism.
Oh man, don't even get me started on that.
It's everywhere,
Right.
right?
Like everyone on social media is a financial expert these days.
It's hard to know who to trust.
It is. And I get why people are drawn to these gurus. Money is complicated. It feels good to have someone just tell you exactly what to do.
Right. It's like, just give me the answers.
But the reality is no one has all the answers.
No one can predict the future.
It's like if they were so good at predicting the market, wouldn't they just be like chilling on a beach somewhere?
Exactly.
Not trying to sell me their course.
Right. So be a discerning consumer of financial information. Always question the motives, especially when it comes with a big price tag.
Especially then.
The best financial decisions, honestly, they're usually the boring ones.
The sensible ones.
The ones that align with your own goals and your own risk tolerance.
Okay, so instead of looking for that quick fix, that magic formula,
Right.
we should really be focusing on building a solid understanding of personal finance principles.
Exactly. And making informed decisions based on our own situation.
This whole conversation has really got me thinking about what financial success even means.
And that brings us to one of Housel's most powerful messages, the importance of defining your own enough.
I love that. Enough. Because enough looks different for everyone, right?
It does. It's not about hitting some arbitrary number in your bank account.
It's not about keeping up with the Joneses.
Exactly. It's about figuring out what truly matters to you and building a life that reflects that.
I love that.
Housel emphasizes the importance of crafting a financial strategy that brings you peace of mind.
Peace of mind, yeah.
Not chasing returns at all costs. Like, what good is a huge portfolio if you're stressed out all the time? You never have time to enjoy it.
That's a good point. This reminds me of when my partner and I decided to pay off our mortgage early. From a purely financial standpoint, it probably wasn't the smartest move.
Oh, interesting.
We could have earned higher returns investing that money elsewhere.
Right.
But honestly, it just brought us so much peace of mind. It was like this huge weight lifted off our shoulders.
That feeling of freedom.
Exactly. Owning our home outright, it just gave us this sense of security and freedom that, to us, was worth more than any potential investment gains.
That's a great example of what Housel calls a reasonable over rational decision.
It felt right to us.
And that's what matters, aligning your decisions with your values, even if it means going against conventional wisdom.
So the real question is, What does enough look like for me? What kind of life do I want? And how can I use money as a tool to help me get there?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that we each have to answer for ourselves.
Well, I feel like we've covered a ton of ground today. Narratives, room for error, pessimism, financial gurus. I'm starting to see money in a whole new light.
That's great to hear. We've explored a lot, but there's still more to uncover.
Ooh, there's more.
There is. And the final part of our deep dive, we're going to take a fascinating look at the history of the American consumer
Okay.
and how their whole mindset about money has evolved over time.
Oh, I can't wait for that. All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the psychology of money. And today we're going to be talking about something I think is really interesting, which is the evolution of the American consumer.
Yeah, tell ready for a little bit of a history lesson.
I'm ready.
Housel, he takes us all the way back to 1945, right after World War II. So imagine millions of soldiers coming home,
Yeah.
ready to start families, build a future,
Mm-hmm.
and there's this feeling of hope in the air.
Yeah.
But also a lot of challenges. I mean, the country had to transition from a wartime economy to, peacetime.
Oh, I bet that was a huge adjustment.
It was. Housing was scarce. Factories had to switch from making, tanks to making toasters.
Right.
And there was this big fear of falling back into another depression, like the one they just came out of.
So what did they do? How did they get the economy going again?
They did something pretty bold, actually.
Okay, tell me.
They decided to basically create the American consumer as we know it today.
Wait, what? They just invented consumer culture?
In a way, yeah. They kept interest rates really low, encouraged people to borrow and buy,
Mm-hmm.
and they made consumer credit widely available. So suddenly, average people could buy things like cars and appliances, even homes,
Wow.
without having all the cash up front.
So it was like they were saying, go ahead, spend money. It's good for the economy.
Exactly. And to be fair, it worked. I mean, consumer spending exploded, and it led to this massive economic boom in the post-war years.
But there had to be a downside, right? What about all that borrowing?
Well, that's the thing. Debt, which used to be seen as, a last resort, something to be ashamed of,
Right?
it started to become normalized. It was easier and easier to buy now, pay later.
Mm.
And slowly but surely, we shifted from a culture of saving and thrift.
Like our grandparents' generation.
Exactly. To a culture of instant gratification, keeping up with the Joneses.
It's wild how much our attitudes towards debt have changed just in a few generations.
Right. And Housel argues that this shift has had a huge impact, both on individuals and on the economy as a whole.
Okay, so we've got this new American consumer fueled by easy credit. What happened next?
Well, the 50s and 60s, those were pretty good times. Lots of prosperity, more equality, wages were rising, the middle class was growing.
The American dream.
Exactly. It felt attainable for a lot of people, but then the 70s hit.
Oh, the 70s. Wasn't that all like bell-bottoms and disco?
It was, but it was also a time of major economic turmoil. We had skyrocketing inflation, wages were stagnant.
So people weren't making more money, but everything was costing more.
Exactly. People were feeling a lot of anxiety about money.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Plus, you had the Vietnam War, Watergate, the oil crisis. It felt like the world was kind of falling apart.
So how did the American consumer cope with all this?
Unfortunately, by leaning even harder on debt, Housel points out that household debt just kept climbing during this period.
Even though wages were flatlining.
Yep, it was a recipe for disaster.
It sounds like it. Try to outrun quicksand or something.
And eventually, it all culminated in the 2008 financial crisis, which was, a pretty brutal wake-up call.
Oh, yeah.
A reminder of what happens when that debt bubble bursts.
Right, right. So have we learned our lesson, or are we still making the same mistakes?
It's tough to say for sure. I mean, there's definitely been some progress in terms of financial literacy and regulation, but it does seem like a lot of the same patterns are still playing out today.
It's like we're still constantly bombarded with messages telling us to buy more stuff, upgrade our
Yeah,
lifestyle.
keep up with the Joneses.
It's hard to resist, especially with social media showing us everyone's, supposedly perfect lives and all their fancy things.
It is. And Housel, he doesn't offer any easy answers, but he does encourage us to be aware of those historical forces, those systems that have shaped the way we talk about money.
Be more mindful.
Exactly. We need to be critical of those messages that we're getting about money and make choices that really align with our own values, not just what everyone else is doing.
So big picture, what's the main takeaway here? What can we do differently?
I think the key takeaway is that our relationship with money, it's not just about individual choices. It's about the context we're living in,
Yeah.
The history, the culture, the systems that we're all part of.
Okay.
Understanding those influences, I think that can help us make more informed decisions about our money.
It's not just about being good at math. It's about understanding the psychology of it all.
Exactly. Personal finance is deeply personal. It's influenced by our own unique experiences and the world around us.
Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. The power of narratives, the importance of defining our own enough, the whole history of the American consumer.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. Housel's book really challenges us to rethink our whole relationship with money. I hope our listeners feel empowered to take control of their finances and build a life that's meaningful to them.
Me too. And remember, true wealth isn't about how much you have in the bank. It's about the richness of your life experiences, the freedom to pursue your passions, the peace of mind that comes from making thoughtful choices.
That's a great message to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of money and the minds that manage it. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring.